Welcome to this seminar this afternoon. We're really privileged to have Andrew Nagle, Dr. Andrew Nagle, as the Director of the Water, Land and Ecosystem CRP within the CGIAR. I've known Andrew for a while. He's worked in South Africa, but then he spent a number of years in Australia working with CSIRO, the organisation I used to work for. So he spent some time in Northern Australia working on land use systems there, and then went off to IMI as a researcher for a number of years. Came back to Australia to work with the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, ACR, which most people in Ecosystems know as a key donor of Ecosystems. So he was the land and water manager at Ecosystems for a number of years, and then returned to the CGIAR in this director role 2 years ago. So, Andrew, I thank you very much for coming and visiting Ecosystems to talk to us about the WLE program and Ecosystems' contribution to the program. Really appreciate the effort in joining us here for a couple of days. So, Ecosystems is a strong contributor into the WLE program. Our natural resource management work within Ecosystems is really important alongside our crop improvement work. So Andrew, we look forward to hearing about the work that WLE has done and where you think it might go in the future. So,
thank you very much, Peter. And right at the outset, I'd like to thank David for the opportunity to come to present the invitation. It's fantastic to be back here. It's been a number of years. And I think it's about 3 or 4 years when I was last here. And it's nice to see some familiar faces that are still around. So, thank you very much, and it's great to be here. Now, slides. Very good. Thank you very much, David. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about Water, Land and Ecosystem CRP. And I think most of you know about the CRP, but I want to really try and highlight what I think is why do we need a Water, Land and Ecosystem CRP, number one. 2, the changes that we've made over the past year or so to the program that I think puts us on a very sound footing as we move into a second phase. And then thirdly, to talk about, I think, the great work that's going on in the program. And I think what I'll show to you today is just the tip of the iceberg. We have some wonderful people, I think, very fortunate to have these people working in the program. And I think what you see of WLE is just an organizing construct. At the end of the day, it's centers like Ecosystems that are critical to the program and the people within it. So, I'd like to start by looking at, or ask the question, what did you have for breakfast today? So if you look at the left-hand corner, that would be traditionally a type of breakfast that you would have in Europe or in Australia on a Saturday morning when you take your wife out for breakfast. Yeah? Bacon and eggs, okay, sorry. Get that out. And right down in the right-hand corner is probably a breakfast that you would find in sub-Saharan Africa. Now the key point about this is about development. Pulling people out of poverty actually moves people from a basic staple breakfast that you see in the right-hand corner to somewhere in between. And so what we're saying is that there's going to be drastic changes in the way people see food and eat food as we move into the future. And that's the challenge we have. So, if you want to put in a nutshell, what are the big challenges we face into the future? And I've here focused specifically on some of the key challenges that we think in WLE are going to be game changers. Population growth and demographic change. People are moving to cities. When people move to cities, there are opportunities and there are challenges. Resource competition and scarcity. We can't get away from that. We have been consuming too much. Rising average incomes creates inequity. We have a greater inequity today than we've ever had. Environmental change, floods and droughts, will become the norm and extreme events. And then finally, reducing greenhouse gases. So if you want to put this into a collage of what are the challenges in the next 20 years, those are the big ones that I see. We have mismanaged our resources. Just some numbers here. We're losing 12 billion tons of soil annually. Is that sustainable? We have 12,000 cubic kilometers of water that is polluted. These numbers are quite staggering. And we're losing forests, and we have these huge amounts of emissions. And let's be quite frank, agriculture has had the biggest impact on the environment globally. So, what is the challenge? We actually have to reconfigure our agricultural production system. And I think, if you attended Nancy's presentation prior to this, you can see what potentially we'll have to move towards. Quite a different type of landscape. And what we've got to do is build resilience and create opportunities for equity. And I'm the eternal optimist. That's why I'm in the CGIAR, and I think you have to be. And I'd say, yes, we can do it. But I want to point out the challenges that we're facing that we see as agriculturalists actually are being seen by other sectors. This came out in January in the Global World Economic Forum. Just have a look at the risks that economists, global economists are seeing. Up here in the corner is climate change, along with water scarcity and security. And then the other one here is biodiversity loss. Now, who would have thought 10 years ago that economists would be talking about this? So here we're seeing a dramatic change. And I think also we've got to be realistic. Here's a graph of the food price index versus the energy price index. And what you see is they actually follow the same trend. Today we have the lowest prices of energy that we've had in decades. Does that mean food prices will decline? And what are the implications for investments into agriculture? So I think these things are on the horizon that will influence the way we see things. So I'm going to talk briefly about WLE, the structure of WLE and the changes that we've imposed. And we think that there's a new approach to natural resource management where we feel healthy, functioning ecosystems are a prerequisite for sustainable agricultural development. This is quite a change to what we've been thinking of before, because we've been driven effectively by a production-based approach to agriculture. I'm not being critical about production, but what we've done is that production's been at the expense of a functional ecosystem and the services they provide. And we've got to change that. So in WLE, last year we made a dramatic change in the structure. And what we've done is effectively got 5 flagships, the 4 on the outer edge of the circle, but in the center is effectively the 5th, you could say, focal or flagship, being the focal regions, which focuses on integrating ecosystem solutions into policies and investments. So we see our role is generating evidence with partners. We need evidence-based approach to making decisions. Multi-sector engagement is critical. In many of the problems that we're facing, we can't do it within a single sector. I think key to change is going to be changing mindsets and behavior. And that's something we haven't really spoken about within the CGIAR. So we see these as key influencing factors. And around that, we're looking at livelihoods, productivity, sustainability, and efficiency. And we have cross-cutting, what we call core themes: strengthening decision analysis and information using big data. Ecosystem services and resilience. We build that into all the projects we have. And gender, poverty, and institutions. Women will be the agriculturalists of the future in many of the countries we're working. And around that, we have these flagships on land, water, productivity, revitalizing degraded ecosystems, resource recovery and reuse. We're probably unique amongst the CRPs, and that's we're talking about urban areas, peri-urban agriculture, and managing resource variability. So that's the new construct of WLE. And what is the scale at which we're working? And I think this is quite unique to WLE. We transgress from a spatial perspective that scale, from farm through to basin, through to growth. But we think our greatest influencing is at a national, regional level. So that's where we see our impact being. At a global scale, well, many of the parties in WLE have been well embedded within the SDG discussions and the groups. And many of the indicators that are there on the table at the moment actually have come through the CGIAR, particularly in the water sector. So effectively we are having an influence at that global scale. And then where do we work? We've made a conscious decision to focus on 4 focal regions: the Volta Niger, the Nile East Africa Corridor, the Ganges, and the Greater Mekong subregion. But we also have work that is outside, and we encourage that. Why? Because it all feeds into, essentially, the program and that sustainability element. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples now of WLE's contributions to sustainable intensification. And I think when I look at it, I always think of this as it's really, we're going to focus mainly on 3 areas this afternoon: harnessing big data, developing solutions, which may be very much contextual in nature, and then the unique flagship of ours, which is looking at peri-urban systems. And I think the way we like to see WLE operating is identification and assessment of ecosystems and their roles, the flows and benefits that are generated, the trade-offs. At the end of the day, what we're talking about is really trade-offs. There are very few win-win situations, but understanding the trade-offs are critical. Scales, gender inequity, and what we bring to the table is integrated research. That's where we think we have an advantage. But what I wanted to put up, you could say as a straw man, is what do we understand by sustainable intensification? You have different definitions by different parties and different groups. But I would hazard a guess that if we want to look at sustainable intensification, we've got to look at what do we want it to deliver. And I see these as clear indicators that we would like sustainable intensification to deliver. Clean, healthy waterways. Use of natural infrastructure far more effectively, for example. diverse landscapes where you have predators as well as you could say pollinators sitting in these environments. Carbon sequestration. We want to prevent soil nutrient mining, and you can go on and go on and go on. But this is what I think we aim to do when we talk about sustainable intensification, the outcomes of sustainable intensification. So let me go on and talk about the three components that I wanted to run by. And firstly, I'm going to talk about harnessing big data. And we strongly believe we can only manage what we know. And I think we're at a point in history where we have the tools and the platforms that can generate vast amounts of information that can go towards assisting in the decision-making process. Many of the challenges that we have are going to be solved not through a technological fix, but through a policy, governance, behavioral change environment. And that requires information. So let me give you some examples of that. And it also probably demonstrates the kind of scales in which WLE is operative. So the first one is looking at the land health surveillance system that we have for sub-Saharan Africa. And this is a joint venture with Gates and Columbia University, the World Soils Information Group, and ECRA. But I think what is really great about this is that this is, you could say, a collective consortia coming together to look at the surveillance system, but also more importantly, a system that's going to be measuring and quantifying different traits, particularly of soils. And so the kind of stuff that they're working on, excuse me, with regard to rapid approaches to developing soil data has actually expanded quite dramatically from just the laboratory in Kenya, Nairobi, to laboratories now in Ethiopia, Ghana, Nigeria, and Tanzania that are generating huge amounts of information on soil attributes. And also, if we're going into essentially the SDGs, we see that this system could have very significant implications in monitoring changes that are occurring. I think ICT holds huge opportunities. And here's some work that's being undertaken where we're looking at smartphone platforms to actually provide information to farmers. And that goes from spate irrigation issues in parts of Sudan through to early warnings with regard to floods. And there are also opportunities of using mobile phone technology to generate information on rainfall and intensity, particularly in areas where you do not have these gauging or instrumentation to quantify it. So I think there are huge opportunities there, and there's a lot of work that's going on in the program that is looking at smart technology. We have a chair in Ecosystems, for example, doing a lot of work on that. That's mapped to WLE. Coming from a water institute, and water being a very key component in our production systems, what we suffer from often is the challenges of getting information, particularly in unengaged basins. Using effectively technology, we can actually generate volumes of water almost on a real-time basis that is moving through basins. So we have this joint venture with UNESCO IHE and POW, where we're looking at a water accounting approach. And we've developed water accounting. I think they've done it for the Nile. They're working on it for the Mekong at the moment. But this is a platform that we think will have huge implications for decision makers in understanding where is water going in these different sectors at a basin scale. Gender. And we all know that women are a critical component of our agricultural production systems. So what we've been doing is looking at gender profiling at a basin scale. And here you've got essentially the Volta, where you can actually see the gender distribution and some of the issues associated with gender are all mapped to these bases. But what is key to this is assisting in making decisions of where you should be targeting gender approaches to addressing some of the issues. So we see this as a starting point in looking at where do you want to effectively get your best bang for your buck if you're wanting to address some of the gender issues. The second thing I wanted to put to you is this whole aspect of developing solutions for impact. And I must stress here that many of the solutions here, there are no silver bullets, are very context specific. And I think one of the best things that WLE can bring to the table is looking at the trade-offs. And many of the approaches, and we talked about it this morning with regard to watersheds and watershed development, there are positives and there are negatives. And it's really understanding those trade-offs that are critical in making a decision. So I'm going to give you an example from Bangladesh that WorkFish have been working on. And it relates to the fact that you have these natural wetlands called beels in Bangladesh. And these are in the floodplains. And these are very productive systems. But effectively what you found is that no one has actually been making use of them. And the work that has been done by WorldFish is one of looking at building community, you could say capacity, to utilize these natural wetlands to actually enhance the production of fish. And in these beels, by changing the composition of certain aquatic species and introducing certain sized fingerlings, you can increase the productivity of these natural wetlands by orders of magnitude. The key point here is that these beels are critical for the landers, and particularly women. And it's had a huge impact on women's lives, effectively with respect to harvesting these small fish. And it's a huge component of the diet that have very positive implications because of the high protein content. Solar, smart solar pumping. And we're here in India, and we have an Indian government that's on a solar discourse, and it's going to boom. And what they're looking at is about 80 gigawatts of solar energy in the next 5 years. And the way the Indian government is going about it is through a subsidy program. The work that Imi Tata is doing is looking carefully at this whole approach. The subsidies and the perverse implications of those subsidies, and looking at the opportunities that could arise through solar pumping. If you think about groundwater exploitation that's occurred in India, you potentially through solar pumps have effectively the same anarchy that potentially could develop. But what if you had an incentive for farmers to sell back energy into the national grid? And this is being piloted in Gujarat at the moment to see what is the policy implications, what are the pricing points that you're going to require to get a behavioral change in farmers to sell electricity back into the grid. And we think this is a huge game changer that would move away from these vast, big systems that the government of India are talking about with regard to these solar farms. Small-scale irrigation and the opportunities that small-scale irrigation And I think this in itself is a big game changer, particularly for sub-Saharan Africa. But what are the technologies that are best suited? Where do they have the greatest promise of scaling up? And this work that came through the Ag Water Solutions, again, Gates funded the initial component of this work, has had huge implications. Because what it does, it effectively maps out where in a country different technologies would have the biggest chance of success and scalability, along with looking at policy changes. And we've already seen policy changes that have occurred in Ghana due to the Ag Water Solutions and in Tanzania that have effectively enabled or created an enabling environment that farmers can invest in small-scale irrigation. And it can have very clear implications. From Central Asia, when we're talking about regenerating degraded production systems, if we think about the extent of salinization and large-scale irrigation systems globally, there are about 34 million hectares that are underperforming or actually abandoned. Now, the work in Central Asia has been looking at a crop called licorice, a natural crop that grows in salinized regions, and using licorice as a rehabilitation component in these large-scale irrigation schemes. The cost benefit associated with this is huge. $60 a hectare to grow licorice versus $2,000 to effectively put in effective drainage. The beauty about licorice is that you can cut it and you can feed it to livestock and you can harvest the roots, which have a confectionery role, a pharmaceutical role, an industrial role. And there's huge markets, and with PIM and IFPRI, we've looked at the value chain of licorice roots, particularly in China, and it's phenomenal. So here we see, fit for a specific environment, a possible solution or tool in your toolbox. And then finally, I think under this is looking at this whole notion of benefit sharing. And here we're talking about how do we effectively share the benefits equitably. And this comes from work in Peru, where we've been looking at essentially how do you could say, incentivize as well as pay upper watershed communities for the benefits that are generated through looking after the environment with respect to water. And we've been very successful with this, as shown that you can have a benefit sharing mechanism where irrigators in the lower portion of the valley actually pay communities in the upper portion of the valley to protect the watershed. And this is now passed into law in Peru, and they're rolling this out in 30 locations in the Andes. So again, a policy change, an influencing policy. And finally, my final example is probably the uniqueness of WLE, is that it has a periurban agriculture focus. We know that in 2050, most of the global population will be living in cities. We know currently, at the moment, there are 20 million hectares of arable land globally that is actually being irrigated with marginal quality water. We also know that in many of the big cities, the predominant source of food is within a 20 to 25 kilometer radius. So periurban agriculture is a huge agricultural system which has been neglected. The work we've been doing has been picked up by some of the big news agencies, and hence we think we're on to something here. And the focus of the work within the RRR flagship, is not about technology. Where we have been very successful with WASH is putting in a toilet that has huge positive implications for health. But what we didn't consider within the WASH system is what do you do with the waste? So we see this as an opening of how do we convert huge amounts of on-site septage into a business model. And effectively we're looking at global cases of business models that take essentially septage and converts it into an economic good. And that economic good can be a fertilizer, it can be briquettes for energy. And here's an example of what the program has produced. It's produced a product called 45, which is produced from septage and is completely safe, and it has huge implications for food production. So the whole focus of this is actually looking at what are successful business models, private-public partnerships, that actually can make this a sustainable industry. So I'm going to leave it there and just say, I think it's critical to acknowledge the 11 partners that we have, CG partners in WLE, and and I think, you know, if it wasn't for this huge number of centers, we wouldn't have the type of program we have. An integrated program, a program that's looking at novel solutions, and a program that we think has scalability. So I'd like to just say thanks to Ecosat and all the people in Ecosat that have contributed to WLE, and to keep up the great work. Thank you very much, Peter.
Good job, Andrew. I think that's really is a nice articulation of the work that WLE have been doing, and it's really interesting. So I open the floor for any questions. Arash.
Thank you very much for your inspiring talk. I have three issues, very simple, I think. You said in India, Gangetic regions have been chosen the flagship. But actually the problems are more in hard rock areas, where the groundwater depletion is a major problem. So we have to focus more in hard rock areas of peninsular India. So why that is left out, that is one.
Okay.
And second, addressing the energy crisis here, smart solar pumps. From the viewpoint of an individual, it is not at all economically viable. It involves huge investments. Maybe how do you address this? Maybe for a group approach, how this has to be harnessed. Then third, you said the peri-urban agriculture. Land values are appreciated. Labor scarcity. How to make it this one, this economically viable in peri-urban agriculture? That is a major issue. Burning. So can you just
Okay, really good points. Okay, so you brought up a very good point about over-extraction of groundwater in the hard rock areas. Okay, so if we want to look at a learning, what did we learn about rural electrification in India and free electricity? Because that was the driver of this over-extraction. So if you were a minister in Gujarat, where they had the big problem of over-extraction from these hard rock systems, he came to EMI and he said, this was Mr. Modi, he said, I have a problem. I have my utilities that are going bankrupt because I'm supplying free electricity. So the first option you've got is essentially to price electricity. If you're Mr. Modi and you all of a sudden start to price electricity, you probably won't be in politics the next time around, if I'm correct. Is that how it works? So what he asked Eni to do is come up with a process. And Eni came up with Jotogram. And Jotogram is a system whereby you separate the electricity supply line. You have 24-hour free electricity to the village, and you have restricted electricity supply to the irrigated fields for a certain period of time on a daily basis. Now what happened is this was piloted and it's now being rolled out throughout Gujarat, if I'm correct. Really, I am not yet. But what it did was it resulted in a huge behavior change. Farmers were pumping 24 hours a day because they thought more water is better. When you only have 6 or 8 hours of electricity, you change the way you use water. And over the past 3 years, they've actually started to see groundwater levels start to rise. So if you're thinking about the challenges that you have in the hard rock systems, this is a solution that's being promoted in Gujarat and is being rolled out elsewhere. Solar pumps. What you've got at the moment is a rather chaotic system in subsidies. We think that at the moment it offers some very perverse incentives because the kind of subsidies that are being passed on to growers are ones in where you are actually investing in a very high quality product. And you probably don't need that. But what I think Tushar and his group are doing is saying, okay, here you've got a system. It's out there. And there's this promotion of solar pumps. How can we prevent this anarchy that arose in the hard rock systems from occurring in this new approach? Why are you wanting to use solar pumps? It's really to effectively address some of the water issues associated with rainfed production. So by effectively offering an incentive for growers to actually sell electricity back into the grid, would effectively mean that you've got potentially a huge supply. When we're talking about millions of solar pumps that a farmer can actually start to get income. And we think that this is quite a smart idea. And it's being piloted in, I think it's Rajasthan or Gujarat at the moment. Rajasthan, is it? And the third one, I don't know, haven't I said enough? What was the third question? It was on, sorry. Period. Yes, you're quite right. Yeah, I think it's absolutely sustainable. Why? Because as urban prices rise, and you can see it around Hyderabad, the peri-urban agriculture just moves further out. But it follows the same circumference. And we're seeing that in West Africa, in Accra, in all of these large mega cities that are developing, urban agriculture just keeps moving out. So you won't get away from it. It's a key critical food supply system to cities. And I think what we've got to do is try and manage that more effectively.
I have been here earlier, the one flagship you mentioned water program there. Economics were somewhat embedded, like last part of your solution comes from economics, but focus was on more W program, on the more data, more thing, and there's no end of the data. So with the existing data, the management, like solution management came, but in the flagship I saw more like a data need type of thing. Where is the policy management, water management is embedded there?
Good point. And I think probably this doesn't do justice what's presented here, the role of economics and governance and policy reform. Now I think, in many of these projects, it's actually embedded in there. So if you look at the licorice work in Central Asia, it's required a policy reform to have occurred within Central Asia, whereby the government has now released these abandoned lands to farmers. And that required a huge amount of negotiation to get that done, because farmers can't own land, the state owns the land. But setting up effectively an instrument where they hand the land back to the farmer for a predetermined period of time, when it's handed back to the state in a rejuvenated condition, was a big negotiation process. And so embedded in all of these is an economic and governance aspect.
Andrew, I'm going to follow on. You're director of a CRP program called WLE, and you talked about, let's take one issue, like the harnessing big data for decision making at a policy level. How does a CG and the different CRPs deal with an issue like that that's I think everybody identifies, when we have a policies, institutes and markets CRP, which I think would have primacy, you have a CCAPS CRP, you have a WLE CRP, and you have all the centres interested. How does a CG get its act together around critical big issues like that?
Yeah, I think, Peter, that's a huge challenge for the CGIAR. If you were to ask me, you probably want one repository of all information and someone to have custodian. So you could effectively have a CRP just on big data, which would then service, in essence, all of the other CRPs. And I'm not, I might be talking out of turn, but that's, if you're looking at efficiencies, that's really what I think we should be doing as a CG.
Thanks, Salim.
Yeah, just somewhat similar to what Peter said, a little bit at micro level, but in WL you are working at farm level and landscape level, agro-ecosystem, biophysical, but in your work also at the household level, in fact, and then policy. But we have many other programs like balance systems that work on the farm level, plot level, and livelihood systems and value chains we talk about. Similarly, other CRPs. So many times we see that everybody is working separately on similar issues when you really reach into the farmer. So I don't know whether it's not up to your level only, but how these CRPs could be really integrate, so we are not repeating and trying to do the same thing in different way. What to do, and do you have any idea on that?
Okay, so you bring up a very good point. I mean, first of all, the bulk of WLE's work is actually not at the farm level. We have components at the farm. We see there are other CRPs that are far better at working at the farm household level. But you're right. Every CRP is maybe working on value chains, or working on household issues, or working on farm issues. And I think, you know, if you were to reconfigure the CRP, you maybe want to think about reconfiguring them around a problem set. And you then bring the resources to bear on a problem set. And I think, to me, that is a far more efficient approach. And that's my own personal opinion, so don't quote me on that. But that's how I see it, is that you look at a problem set and you bring the resources to bear upon it.
You mean not going to quote you, I'm not going to write it down. Because, you know, from being in CSIRO, when we were matrix, that was around big issues, not around disciplines. That's it. The matrix was organised. So, I mean, that's an idea we'll feed back in through our DG and for you as a CRP director into this rethinking the CRP.
Yeah, I strongly believe that it should be around a problem set. So if you were to say, the problem in India is how do I effectively still maintain sovereign food security in 2050, that's your problem. how are you going to do it in India? And you bring effectively the knowledge of the sectors to bear upon it.
Anything was worse than that, didn't you?
Yeah, you talked a few times about emphasizing institutional arrangements and collective action and community management. We've been doing that for decades. Maybe you can describe some of the successes that WLE is discovering in terms of community action and management.
Anthony, I think, if I go back and I look at the CGIAR over the past 13 years that I've been engaged, there was this transformation that occurred on this whole aspect of participatory approaches. And we still do a lot of that. I have great concerns about that. And my concerns are based around the resources required to scale that up. I could have shown you an example here that we've been working on, looking at men and women groups on how they, using game theory, how they actually make decisions over waters. Now, you can do that at a village level or several villages, but the resources required to do that are just non-scalable. So to me, where you're going to get your biggest impact is in essence at a government's institutional approach. So if you look at where WLE has been working, it has been working at reforming large-scale irrigation bureaucracies. And I think it has been quite successful. And there are changes that are occurring here in India. There are changes that are occurring in Pakistan and in Central Asia. But it's at that larger level and policy arena and institutions, reforming institutions, is where I think you're going to get your biggest bang for your buck. Something that's scalable.
Okay, Dave, I think you put your hand up in response to the previous questions.
This last comment stimulated another. So, we talk about restructuring. I agree around a grand challenge, but it needs to be based on a geography. You answered that in your example of India. So I think it's really important to understand this, that context that will impact on delivery. Your last comment, though, as I was watching the presentation and looking at the list of partners there, the private sector, in their absence is actually striking to me, and especially as we talk about scale and sustainability. I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
David, if I had designed this right at the start, it would have had the private sector in it. Because I think the private sector will be critical in addressing the challenges. And I think, the World Economic Forum, which is essentially the private sector and governments coming together, actually are telling us a story. They want to be involved. And so if you want my opinion as you move into the second round, I think it would be imperative that all CRPs, whatever the construct is, has the private sector involved. I think they're critical.
Yeah. No, in water there is this scaling up and the participation is debate in the market. This is the reason here you are falling apart the management, economic policy, these things. So why we need to scale up everything? It's market driven. When private sector involved, market take care of that. And market, you need to worry about scale up. I have that in the economic solution, which is I see earlier presentation that is the missing, and that is the reason we don't need to scale up everything.
No, not at all. I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
And I think in many cases the private sector are far better at doing it. And I think, to be quite frank, from a CGIAR perspective, that's not our bread and butter. And that's why partnerships are so important. So if you look at the Innovation Fund and the focal regions, where it was an open and competitive reform, the private sector is actually in many of those projects as partners. And that's an experiment that that we're dealing with. And why do we partner with the private sector? Is because they are far better at scale and taking things to market.
Okay, Andrew, I'm going to call it quits there. Thank you very much for that. It was, as I said at the start, it was great as the WLE director to come and visit Ecosystems, to hear about what we're doing here and Annie are doing in India and Africa this morning, and then to hear about the work that WLE is doing. So we really appreciate your visit. Andrew's going to be around tomorrow and a bit later in the week, I think, so if people want to catch him as possible. So join me in thanking Andrew for a really informative seminar.